Hello again, Michael Diversa here, this time with Christopher J. Fernandez, the Service Delivery Manager for Diaz Group LLC. And believe me, that role carries quite a load. Chris, thank you for taking a few minutes to talk with me here.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for having me. I see you struggle a little bit with my title. I know it's kind of weird, so that's why.
That's okay. Chris has a knack for being able to make people smile. So I could actually talk to him for quite a while, but I'm going to limit our time to the usual 3 questions. So Chris, to put it mildly, you've been around. Please tell everybody, where are you from originally, and where have you lived and been during the period of time leading up to coming to Diaz Group?
All right, Michael. I was actually born in Guadalajara, Jalisco, Mexico. I lived there for a couple of years before my family and I went to Aguascalientes, which is a small city like 2 hours from Guadalajara. We went there because my dad got offered a position in his company there, and we stayed there. We created our hometown in Aguascalientes, and I really enjoyed it. Talking to a lot of people throughout my life, I've always had the feeling that I lived in a small town. It's a 1 million people city, and obviously that for Mexico, having Mexico City, Monterrey, or Guadalajara, big cities, that is sort of small. Aguascalientes is like 1% of everything in Mexico. But then coming to the U.S., there's a lot of little towns in here that are actually little towns, right? So I'm realizing, like, okay, I lived in a small city, not in a small town, right? But ever since I was a kid, I wanted to live in Aguascalientes. I felt like I was stuck in a small city where nothing happened. We didn't really have soccer back then, and I'm a huge fan of sports. So my team plays in Guadalajara, so every now and then, every other week, we went to Guadalajara to see them play and a lot of things. So I really felt like Aguascalientes was a boring town where nothing happened. Now I understand that's a good thing, though, but I was a kid, I wanted to experience things. So obviously, ever since I was a kid, I really love geography and history and a lot of things right now as well. But I used to research everything. I'm a very curious guy, and I used to, wondering about what Europe looked like. So I really love capital cities. I can have like a contest about capital cities. Africa and Asia are not my strong, but I can still try. So obviously I wanted to go to Europe and visit it and be a tourist and even live there. So when I was in my college doing my bachelor's degree in civil engineering, I wanted to, there's a scholarship that you can get that works with the French government and the Mexican one, and it's completely free. It's a full scholarship for 1 year in a small city in near Paris, like an hour from Paris. And I was studying French since I was in high school, so I'm like, this could be a good opportunity to actually live in Europe like I was planning on. So I did the whole process. I'm on top of the list in French knowledge on the guys that went to the interview. So I'm pretty confident. I'm usually pretty confident about myself. That's not necessarily a skill though. But I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna get it. I'm gonna get it 100%. But then my interview went downhill, very, very awkwardly from the very beginning. So you were saying like I have a knack for making people smile. That didn't work with her. That was just an awkward and awful conversation I had with her from the very beginning. I started off with the joke. In French, it's a black, and I'm like, don't take it too seriously, ma'am. And she's like, we're being serious right now. I'm like, oh, I'm not gonna get it. So the scholarship went away. On that moment, I was just too nervous to keep talking. I forgot all the words that I knew in the language. I forgot what I wanted to, become someone in life. So the rest of the interview just didn't work. So I knew it, but I was still wondering about the result. Obviously, I didn't get it. I was devastated because I'd been, saving money and continuing to learn the language prior to this process, and then I don't get it. So it's awful. But then my dad saw how sad I was about it, and he pushed me to continue to do research on what other scholarships are there in in my college. So there's a different pattern that you can follow, which you don't really get a scholarship. You get like some sort of money from the college that you're in. And the good thing is that you don't have to overpay anything. So you just pay your regular amount to the college. Mine is a public one, so it's not that awfully expensive. So just do your regular tuition fee for the semester, and if you get approved for that in exchange, you can just go to the university you chose, right?
Okay.
So I did that for Spain because I wanted to be accurate on my first trial. I didn't want to be rejected again. So I went to Madrid, and I lived there for 6 months, where I actually ended up meeting my today wife. So I was there for 6 months, and obviously I had all these plans prior to going to Madrid because I was going to France for a year, and I had all different sorts of trips already set up. The Eurorail, and doing a trip on train in Europe could be something worth doing, super not expensive and super cool to do. I wanted to do that, but I couldn't because of the season I was in Europe. It didn't really linked to my plans, but I really spent a good 6 months in there because I met my wife there. She's Colombian. I went back to Aguascalientes to finish my bachelor's degree. She was doing her master's degree. She finished. She spent another 6 months after I left there finishing the master's degree, and then she went back to Colombia. We were doing a long distance relationship, which I wouldn't recommend. It's not fun to anybody, but it really gave our relationship another strength that we have, and a lot of people do not have in the relationship, that really keep us moving and makes us win every single battle that we're in. So I really am grateful for that period of time, even though it wasn't a lot of fun. But because I was finishing my bachelor's degree and she went back to Colombia, now we're discussing what's going to happen with us, right? Somebody needs to move. I'm still living with my parents. She's living in Bogota, capital city. She has her own apartment now. I'm like, it's easier for me to go. Even though I love my family because I grew up with only my parents and my brothers, I'm like, I can be a little bit more detached from my hometown and family than what I think she could be eventually. So I'm like, I'm gonna go to Colombia. So I went to Bogota. I lived there for 4 years. We got married. I struggled a little bit on work. The beginning, being a civil engineer, they don't understand that civil engineers can do a lot of things, but being on the dirt and construction. I don't like construction, actually. I'm a civil engineer for other reasons. I like urban design, transportation systems, hydraulics, and all of that, not construction. I don't like the dirt. But they didn't get it, so I couldn't get a job there, so I started doing sales there. And then that kept me on the same path until I decided, because of the pandemic, I was unemployed for a few months because the school I was working for ended up closing, and we were in a crisis within our family because there was like economical issues and stuff. So I'm like, I am a U.S. citizen because I inherited my dad's citizenship. What am I doing here? If I want to be somewhere right now, when the pandemic's over and the finance of things start to go up, I'm sure the U.S. is going to be one of the first countries to actually see the good impact of that, right? I have a passport, I'm going to go. So I decided to come here. Obviously, I've been here before. I spent a lot of summers, not a lot, quite a few summers in Chicago, where my family is at. I have a couple of uncles here. My brother was already living here, so it was an easy choice for me to be here in Chicago.
Sure.
So then I came here.
Awesome.
So I traveled a lot, but lived only in 4 different places.
Understood. And that brought you us in January of 2021, right?
Correct.
Very good. Speaking of languages, you've helped me since that time a number of times with translations, English into Spanish, and the results have always been great. Now, just last week, we were kidding around about something, and I discovered that you also know a little bit of Italian, which surprised me. How many different languages do you speak?
So I would like to say a lot, but I don't feel like I'm fluent in a lot of them. I would say English and Spanish are the main ones. I really love Italian. I only was able to study it for a year, but because it's so similar to Spanish and because I love languages, I know more words than I can actually have a conversation with. Right?
Sure.
I can tell you a couple of words, but I wouldn't be able to context them, right? Can present myself and all of that, but that's it. It's just a year of learning. And then I've studied French for 7 years. The bad part about French and German is that they're difficult languages that if you don't get to practice, you're gonna suck eventually, right? You lose it. It doesn't happen that often with English because obviously I'm living here and I'm using it every day, but it's an easier language, and you have it in movies, you have it in music, you have it all over the place.
Sure.
Obviously, you could say like, why do you hear French music? But I'm not gonna. But that's basically it. I've also read German books. My wife and I love a lot of things about Germany, starting with the language, and we have like 50 different books about learning German by yourself. But we've only gone through a couple. The other 48 are in Colombia now. So I really like German as well because there's a lot of similarities with English. So and also knowing French and the different cultural relationships that they had throughout the history of the world. You can try to understand why teeth is like dip, and you're like wondering about the different things and when they actually separated from being the same culture, right? So that's why I love languages, but I would say 3.5 languages would do
No,
it.
that's fine, that's fine. One more question. I know when you and I first began working together, you came here alone, and as it turns out, quite a bit of time passed before your wife and your child were able to join you. That couldn't possibly have been easy for any of you. Tell us a little bit about it, if you can.
Sure. Yeah, like I said before, being in a long distance relationship, at the beginning of our relationship, maybe actually set up the foundation to be able to do that afterwards, which is double awfulness in our life because we've been separated for 2 periods in our lives, which I wouldn't wish anybody to go through. But we sort of knew how to manage, these little discussions or fights that could, with the distance, could end up being disruptive and just create bigger animosity. Sorry about that. Bigger animosity than what a little fight could be being facing each other, right? But yeah, so I decided to come here. My wife has a tourist visa, so she would only be allowed in as a tourist, and it's not necessarily legal to have on your mind that you're gonna change status when you come here. So we don't want to have any sort of problems with the law or anything. So we decided to do things rightfully because I already have a daughter and I'm a U.S. citizen. It's very hard for the child of a U.S. citizen to be able to request a tourist visa because countries do not like illegal statuses or changing statuses while on their country. And if you're already the daughter or the son of a U.S. citizen, you need to file for a U.S. citizenship or a U.S. Permanent residency. Not necessarily a tourist visa. And especially with the pandemic, in the time that we actually did the whole process, Trump had passed a statement where green card holders were last on the priority list for bringing fiancés and family members because of how chaotic everything was happening. Only U.S. citizens were allowed to. So that actually created a domino effect where the offices in the U.S. State Department were letting go people because they didn't have enough cases to keep everybody busy. So it created a long queue for even U.S. citizens to bring their fiancés and families and relatives. So we're thinking about 8 months to a year. And even though it's awful because my daughter is only 1 year old and I want to be there for the foundation of her life, we're like, okay, we can take 8 months. I'll visit a couple of times. I'll be there for a couple of weeks every time I come here. It ended up being almost 2 years. So at the beginning, I spent a good 6 months without visiting them. Good thing we have FaceTime and WhatsApp nowadays, but it's not the same, right? It's not the same as hugging them and actually being a part of their life on a daily basis. You're tired of having a relationship over the phone, which we already had before. So it was even worse, right? After the 6 months passed, I was already working here. I was able to go visit him for a couple of days. They were already, so they moved to Cucuta, one of the cities that has a border with Venezuela, because that's where their family lives, my wife's. They came back to Bogota because my wife was still working there. And then when I went there, we're like, hey, why don't we try you guys living in Mexico? I have direct flight from Chicago to Aguascalientes. You can live in my parents' house for a couple of months. We were thinking about months, Michael, at this point.
Sure.
And then you can also spend time with my dad. You can, accompany each other. I think it's a good fit. So that we did that. They went to Aguascalientes, and I was able. That's why I'm so grateful to Diaz, because I was able to come up with a plan that I could work from home a week every now and then. So every 4 to 6 weeks, I would get that permission. That time, back in at the beginning of my work here at Diaz, working from home wasn't like something they really loved or were used to. So it was a good trial for everyone on the management level to allow me to do that, and for me to respond to that, permission, and setting up the path for people to be able to work from home as well, right? Because I actually need to deliver things.
Absolutely.
Because I wasn't on a management level where they can trust you. I'm a new guy, right? They're actually just flipping a coin and letting me go. So I think it worked out in the end. I actually felt more responsible when I was abroad for working more. So I actually sold more stuff while being at Aguascalientes. We started making jokes like I should be there all the time, right? Why don't you let me? So I did that every month and a half. I would go visit him. So it was a little bit better being apart, but not that much. It was for an extended period of time, but we got to a point where we actually see them every month, basically. And finally, in August this last year, they were able to come here. Now we've been together for 6 months. And that also comes with a lot of challenges afterwards, because now you have a 3-year-old daughter that is not entirely used to being around you for the past year. You're like a visitor to her, right? You're like, yeah. So actually, at the beginning of her being here, like after the first week, she's like, okay, now you can leave, Dad. Like, you always leave after a week. Now I think your time's up. I'm like, no, baby, I'm staying now. So she was like, no, you gotta leave.
Oh, no.
So obviously that comes with other challenges, but I love it. I love it. Everything's part of life. I love challenges. I love growing. I love evolving as a human being. So that's cool that we had to live with her. I hope she wants me in her life moving forward, right? That's the only thing I would be, careful about.
That's fine. And unfortunately now you're back together,
and we're good to go.
We're glad that you're here. Listen, Chris, thank you so much for taking the time to share some of your stories with us.
Thank you.
And
Thank you for having
it's
me,
been a
Michael.
pleasure.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Chris Fernandez.